Hey everyone, I'm going to show you a video of how to get texture down in a little bit more unconventional way. So this is something called the frottage method. I'm going to spell it out. You guys are going to see me comment about this on the Canvas site, but it's frottage, spelled like this. But it is a fancy word that essentially means rubbing, right? So this is probably something you guys have done in the past. I do this a lot with my tiny humans when I teach summer camps. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna capture the texture that you see, but instead of drawing it just by like how you manipulate your hand, you're gonna do a rubbing, right? So this works best if you have a soft drawing material, like a vine charcoal, a compressed charcoal, or even some kind of chalk. But if you only have pencils, the higher the B is, the better option, right? So something like a 2B or greater is gonna work really well for this. So I have a couple textures here. I'm gonna start with my bubble wrap. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna place your object or your paper on top of your object. And this is something you guys can do, anywhere around the house, right? With any material, you guys can just experiment. Some things are not gonna be as easy to capture the appearance of the texture, but some things that are really bumpy or rough are gonna be great, right? So I'm just gonna kind of go over. You can see I'm getting a little bit of the bubble texture. Now the harder I press, you guys can see that I'm starting to kind of get these like little circle materials, which is great. That's gonna be like the spots. That's like where I'm really pressing down, right? So I'm gonna shift my paper a little bit. And you guys can see it kind of creates this really interesting texture, right? And it's pretty cool, right? It's something that's really rough and abstract. So something to think about if you're struggling to render something. These are great kind of sketches. And this is something you guys are going to be asked to do in your next sketchbook assignment, right? So it can be very helpful when you're struggling to kind of render textures on your own to do something like this first, right? So now I have this nice shell that I got at the beach on vacation many years ago. So this is, obviously some of my objects are going to be a little harder to kind of capture some of the texture as they're round, right? But you guys can see a little bit, I'm getting some of the lines of the shell. Let's switch to a different part. Try to go for a little bit softer. Let me try to pull out my pencil. Maybe that'll work a little bit better. Right, kind of working back and forth, almost like a scribble texture. Ooh. And I'm pressing quite hard on my shell, right? So you guys can see I'm getting a little bit more of that texture, right? A little bit more of the line works. It's not perfect, right? But, that's what the experimentation's for. Now I have a lot of this nice soft yarn that I have in my studio. I am going to tell you that soft things are kind of unexpected. You really can kind of struggle to get the appearance of soft things, right, when it's balled up. So let me just try for one kind of strand. That's much better. You guys can see that as I kind of go down the yarn, it really gets some of those ripples in place, which is really cool. It's almost like a negative way of thinking, right? So whatever's, usually the object gets that nice light and shadow. With this kind of method, it's usually the object that gets the darker parts, right? And so now you can kind of see I get that nice kind of lumpy, bumpy woven texture, which is really fun. The last one I'm going to do, and I encourage you guys to really just like explore what you think you can get with this method. I have this bowl, right, which is a nice kind of hobnail dented bowl. It's really fun to kind of run my fingers across. Hopefully I can capture some of this texture. Oh yeah. This is really nice. You guys can see that it captured that texture really, really well, right? So it's also really just interesting as a kind of like contrast or abstract motif. And so something you can do with this way of capturing texture, right? And I'm gonna post some videos on how to render texture with pencils and get that kind of illusion of a tactile texture, is now I can kind of cut this out, collage it, and make it whatever I want, right? So I can kind of assign this hobnail texture to maybe a person, maybe it's randomly assigned to a chair, right? So you guys can kind of play around with the idea of how you use texture in your work, and hopefully this gets you inspired.